Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life, Chapter 1, which begins on page 1. Diagnosis: Autism. This book should not exist. Diagnosed with autism at age 5, struggling with severe language delays, unable to succeed in a traditional elementary school, Jory Fleming wasn't expected to graduate from high school. There was no guarantee he could complete 4 years of college. The thought that he would be awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to study for a master's degree at England's prestigious Oxford University was practically unthinkable to almost everyone, including Jory himself. Yet today, Jory has an M.Phil from Oxford appended to his name. This is not a happy ending motivational story or a step-by-step manual for how people with autism can achieve success. Jory is the first to say he does not want to be a poster child for autism or think he can provide an easy answer key to autistic understanding. I'm certainly not expecting anyone to completely understand autism who doesn't have it. That's unreasonable. In the same way, I can't fully understand them. Even if two people who are very well-intentioned try to explain it to each other, there will be some things where both of us will shake our heads or shrug our shoulders and be like, I can't get there. Rather, Jory's story is a window into what it is like to live in a world constructed for neurotypical brains when your mind is not. It is the story of what it is like to begin each day knowing that you are fundamentally different from every other person pouring coffee or tea into their mug. It is a memoir of life inside a gifted and disparate mind. As Jory shares his insights into thinking and navigating in a neurotypical world, it may lead you to question basic assumptions about how all of our minds work. The first few times I spoke with Jory, my brain hurt. Physically hurt, the way my muscles wince after moving stacks of heavy boxes, or on that first spring afternoon when I dig too long in the garden. Twice I had to stop. My concentration was shot. Mentally following his train of thought was akin to swinging a pickaxe through a channel of my own brain that had closed over years ago, or perhaps had never existed. And yet, I think those images and that exhaustion are as close as I can get, in my own words, to explaining what it is like for Jory when he engages with much of the outside world. He speaks so powerfully about the mental energy required for him to move through his day, of the constant balancing act he must undertake to manage the sensory chaos produced by the human world, and yet still have his mind remain open and engaged, rather than drained and shut. It got easier for me, and I hope for him. I became more adept at following his kaleidoscope of ideas. Our conversations were never linear. Instead, they expanded outward and veered sideways without fixed destinations. I came to appreciate his abhorrence of small talk. He became grudgingly tolerant of my requests for lists of things, such as words that make sense to him and words that don't, which he found tedious and I found illuminating. Gradually, as our chats continued, I began to reassess how my own brain is wired. Are there some situations where it is far better to approach a problem largely devoid of emotion? How imperfect is language in communicating? How much weight should be given to words? How much information do we miss when we interact with a group in a crowded room? And still bigger concepts. What is culture? What is disability? Who has value? Should imperfection or illness or painful difference be scientifically edited out of our genetic code and of society at large? Should it not? What is the deeper meaning of birds? What is faith? Plus one sentiment that stopped me cold. Because no human-generated space is going to be a safe place for me forever. And most of all, how to capture that in a book? The answer? Let Jory speak for himself. To that end, I sat with hundreds of transcript pages from conversations, many conducted over Skype, but some had on walks through the British university city of Oxford, or seated on park benches overlooking quaint English gardens, surrounded by the twitter of birds. We would often circle back to the same topic weeks or even months apart, so I took the liberty of grouping related material in one place. I cleaned up the usual excesses of likes, reallys, justs, and half-phrases, while leaving a few behind. I pruned back the many things and somethings and general repetition where it hindered clarity. Since Jory's words flowed from conversations, I included various forms of prompts, whether a question, a transition, or an identifier, to give some context and architecture and a bit of sense of our back and forth. The beginning also contains a brief guide to brain science and the development of our scientific understanding of the human brain, to ground and contrast with Jory's depiction of how his own mind works. You won't find Jory recounting extensive details from his childhood or his life before college in these pages. He doesn't remember much of anything, aside from a few stray images, a toy rocking horse that he found uniquely terrifying, or a deep snowbank that he sank into. He also doesn't remember much about growing up with his older brothers, Arik and Tyler, or his younger sister, Lauren. He recalls his childhood friend, James, and his surrogate grandmother, Miss Nancy, who lived across the street in South Carolina, but very few specifics. Most of the other people that he encountered made no lasting impression on his memory. The keeper of Jory's personal narrative is his mother, Kelly Fleming. She is the one who can relate the history of Jory's early years and his autistic spectrum odyssey. She remains an integral part of Jory's life. She relocated with him to Oxford, England, to care for his medical needs and to make sure that Jory got any additional support he might require. Their story begins when Jory was 6 weeks old and nearly died from a kidney infection that progressed to meningitis. Kelly was in her 4th year of medical school in Lexington, Kentucky. It was her 2nd day back in class when the babysitter called the school. Jory was having trouble breathing and was not acting right. A trip to the doctor became a trip to the local hospital, where he was diagnosed with a kidney infection. When Jory's head began to swell and doctors tapped his spine, Kelly was standing in the room. Where there should have been clear fluid in the needle, there was pus. He was rushed by ambulance to the University of Kentucky's teaching hospital and into pediatric intensive care. Jory had a raging E. coli infection in his bloodstream. In many babies that young, such an infection can be fatal. Jory survived, but his left side was weak, so he was sent to physical therapy at a child development center. At 5 months old, he had surgery to correct the defect that had caused the kidney issue. By 12 months, he was being seen by physical, occupational, and even speech therapists. The therapists mentioned that his language development was very delayed. At a year, Jory had not progressed much beyond the pre-verbal skills of a 10-week-old baby. It was also clear that much of the outside world was intolerable to him. He had sensory integration disorder, Kelly was told. Jory was placed in ankle braces to help him walk. He still has his leg braces for stability and relied on a walker for longer distance until he was nearly a teenager. He was also sent to a pediatric neurologist who diagnosed Jory with mild cerebral palsy. The doctor said one other thing to Kelly, which barely registered. He told her that after reading the reports from the Child Development Center, I would worry a lot more about these speech issues. At the same time, that just went right over my head, Kelly says. He was 18 months old. I wasn't that worried. It seemed like all his problems were physical. Autism, she adds, wasn't even out there in my mind. The family moved to Indiana. In preschool, Jory refused to play with other kids. He would only sit in a stationary rocking chair. In playgrounds, if another child snatched Jory's toy, he wouldn't react. After having 2 older, far more rambunctious boys, Kelly thought to herself, wow, he's really good. When Kelly was pregnant with Jory's sister, Lauren, she had to rush to the emergency department and left Jory with a babysitter at a neighbor's house for 6 hours. He is the best 2-year-old I've seen in my life, the woman told her when she returned. He was so good. All he did was sit on the floor with his little fire engine and spin its wheels. At the same time, Jory's sensory issues grew worse. He hated anything squishy and anything that moved forward or backward. He would not ride a wheeled toy. He would not mash Play-Doh. In response, he screamed. After one particularly awful session when Jory was about 3, an occupational therapist suggested a psychologist who specialized in autism. Kelly recalls, "I was really mad. I thought, the poor kid has cerebral palsy, and that has nothing to do with autism." Except Jory couldn't really communicate. He had started to say words, but the words made no sense to anyone but him. He would repeat words, or maybe part of a phrase from a commercial on TV, but he often did not string sentences together in ways that made sense to other people. I remember we had a little cassette player, and I would ask Jory, "Do you want your music?" Usually he didn't say anything, but one night he said, "It's a cold night." I answered, "Yes, it is. Do you want your music?" And he said again, "It's a cold night." I finally realized that probably what he'd heard me do was say, "It's a cold night," and start the music. After that, if he wanted the music on, he said, "It's a cold night." He'd never say yes or no. I figured out that "it's a cold night" meant yes. If I didn't get "it's a cold night," I wouldn't play the music because he didn't want it. His brain had put words together and made a connection, but it was a connection that no one else got. Then there were the hours of screaming. Jory would arrange his toys, a card game on the floor, or Thomas the Tank Engine trains on a train table, and if anyone touched them or changed their order, he would scream for as long as 5 or 6 hours. He insisted the dining room chairs be pushed in an exact way. Nothing could comfort him. Kelly remembers one winter when there was snow everywhere. There was no getting in your car and going for a drive. There was only go upstairs and try to cover up the sound. Really, there was nowhere any of us could go in the house where we couldn't hear the screaming. Jory's older brothers, Arik and Tyler, knew something was wrong with Jory, but it was hard for them. They all had to give up a lot. After many months of evaluations and a move to South Carolina, the diagnosis came back: autism. And we'll pick the chapter up in the next video.